Okay, so you did watch the HHMI video about Darwin and Wallace and how they came to the same conclusion, and they both wrote very long, detailed books about their discoveries. And we're going to talk about those things. And then just some basic vocabulary for us to know. So, first, let's just talk species. In science, we have classification system. We've mentioned three kingdoms, which are bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Those are our main kingdoms. That's at the very top. And then at the very bottom is species. And a species is a group of organisms that are closely related, i.e., genetics, right? Have very close genetics and can mate and produce fertile offspring. And that's really the big one, the fertile offspring part. So we see a lot of species become species because they live in different areas and they never meet anymore. And if they never meet anymore, then they're not reproducing together. And that might be an example of lions and tigers. So another form of classification would be families, right? So cats are in a cat family, but that's a little higher than species. So we know that cats have a lot of characteristics that make them look like a cat. We all know what cats look like and their characteristics. So lions who live in Africa mate with other lions and have baby lions who can also have more lions. Tigers who live in Asia can meet other tigers and have baby tigers, and those baby tigers can have more tigers. That makes them, separate species. And you could check that with what humans do, unfortunately, at zoos, where we take a lion and a tiger from two different places on planet Earth and put them together, male, female. And it turns out that they can have a cub. Their cub can be born. So here's a picture. This is what they call a liger. It just depends upon which one's the mom and which one's the dad. So there's a tyon or a liger. That's the term they use. Again, it happens in a zoo. But this liger cannot have more ligers. So you couldn't have two ligers get together and then have baby ligers and then more baby ligers. This liger is infertile, cannot have babies, because the genetics between the lion and the tiger are different enough that it really doesn't produce fertile offspring. So that's not a way to create a new species. It's also proof that a lion and a tiger are two different species. And that's really the key here. So just when you're thinking about species, they may look alike, but if they can't have fertile offspring, they are separate. They're separate species by definition in biology class. So, speciation, we're going to mention speciation, right? The formation of new species as a result of evolution. Now, when you're thinking about this, it's again not because two species mix and like, ooh, look, new species. No, it's going to be that there's going to be a whole group of one species that because of separation from another part of their population, they may become a new species. So that's what you're really thinking about. They're going to, a group of one species is going to then evolve into a new species where they can no longer mate with the old group. That's the key on this. And ancestor is a word we're going to use a lot. Whether or not you have a common ancestor, that just means that in our past, that there's an early type of animal or plant that then evolved into all of these different species. And do we share a common ancestor is always going to be a question. In general, we can go all the way back to the beginning of life on Earth, and we all share the common ancestor of a bacteria or a prokaryote, right? So we all share that, but we usually like to get into more detail as to how more closely related we are to each other. So that's what we'll be talking about. Now, the word evolution, not, sometimes a lot of people don't want to hear that word, but it is how we explain biology and what we see. So first of all, just the word itself, evolution, just means change over time. That would be true for anything, like just in general. In life, you could say it evolved into this or that. You could talk about all kinds of things changing over time. For us, obviously, we're going to talk about organisms changing over time. So that's biology. And when we talk about organisms changing over time, we understand it's the changing of the genetics over time, right? The changing of the genetics. That's evolution. And how do we change genetics? Besides just mixing, mutation. So keep always in mind the word mutation because it's going to be important for us. And I might not have it in the slides because we've talked about mutation over the last couple of units. So most people, when they think of evolution, and even your textbook, because we are just talking biology evolution, is talking macroevolution. So we've shown you a different word, but really evolution. This is evolution. Evolution is the development of new types of organisms from pre-existing types of organisms over time. That's evolution. Like, how do we get all these different types of dinosaurs? Well, there was some sort of ancestor in the past that looks like, I don't know, an early dinosaur that then started to split off and form different kinds of dinosaurs. And so we have all different kinds of dinosaurs that came from that one ancestor in the past. Lots of species started out as one species, and now we have lots of species, including birds, which there's a video you can watch about bird evolution or how birds came from dinosaurs. Fairly certain that is true. And so technically, when you look out and see the birds, you can think, oh, dinosaur, because that's where they came from. Obviously don't look anything like T-Rex, though. Maybe that's sad. Maybe that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. Microevolution, which is a heritable change in characteristics within a population from one generation to the next. So when we think of microevolution, we usually, for humans, we see a lot of color change. So for example, a beetle. Say a whole population of beetles lives in the desert and they're all brown. But a group of those brown beetles move into a place where there's a bunch of green leaves. And what happens is because of mutation, some beetles were born green. The green ones survive better, and then suddenly you see more green beetles than brown beetles. They're still the same beetle species, and the greens and the browns can mix all they want. What you're just seeing is that the color, the numbers in the population, the overall, it's kind of up here, the gene frequency or percentage is changing. So sometimes it'll be like all green beetles and sometimes all brown beetles, same species. That's microevolution, and we see that a lot. And again, if we had more time, I'd have another video for you to see about beak size changing on Galapagos Islands with finches, but we don't really have time for that. But that's what this is showing us, micro versus macro. All right. So here's that. There's a video on this from HHMI as well, where we can see that the beak size might change from year to year, but the species is the same. But macroevolution, here's our cats again, right? Again, cat family. So someone back here was an ancestor that had a lot of these characteristics. And then you just see the branching off of the different types of cats that we find around the world. And they do live in different places. So they're very isolated from each other. And because of that, that allows them to be different species over time. And then you can even see that we do look at some of their genetics to show how they're different or the same. So this is showing relationship, and we won't be really going into the details of this, but like the lion and the leopard basically are closely related to each other, and then the next closest relation to them is the jaguar. So over here, see, they split off, and the snow leopard and the tiger are more closely related than the tiger and the lion are, because they are these are on the same little branch. So that's what these little branches tell us. And then you can see our little domestic cat was an early branch away from all the big cats, right? So our little domestic cats are a little small. And then as humans, they're domestic because us humans have bred cats for a long time to have the characteristics that we want. And I really think most humans never wanted any animal the size of a lion living in their house, right? So not so afraid of the cat eating us. All right, so now let's talk scientists. So we always show the scientist, this scientist is wrong, this scientist is wrong, this scientist is wrong. Everybody say, Lamarck is wrong, okay? Why am I teaching it? We teach it because it is the first ideas in scientific literature about evolution. And I often hear adults talk about evolution the way Lamarck talks about evolution. And this is just not true, but it is what people kind of think evolution is all about. So, first of all, Lamarck, this is really early in our understanding of biology, used to think that living things came from non-living things. So, how do you get, like, why do those maggots form on, like, dead meat? Like, it was just the dead meat turned into maggots, which turn into flies. But of course, now we know that a fly laid an egg on the meat and turned into a maggot. So that's wrong. Simple life forms develop into more complex life forms. That's kind of right. You know, we have shown that. That's true. We are getting more complex over time from the simplest prokaryote. Inheritance of acquired traits. So what Lamarck said was that organisms would acquire a trait during their lifetime and then pass it on to their offspring. So that's like you work out all the time and you get all these big muscles, and then basically your baby will have big muscles too. That's what he's saying. This is the famous picture of it, is actually that some giraffe was born with a short neck, but the food got higher and higher. And so the giraffe just stretched its individual neck, just kept stretching every day. And the neck got longer and then longer and longer. And then when they had babies with long necks. So that's how he explained giraffes. We know this is not true. That's not how it works. But that would be an acquired trait. Although I still don't know how they really stretch their necks that long. That's really interesting. And then the use and disuse of traits. If an organism uses their body parts, then they pass it on to their babies. If they don't use their body part, then it won't be passed on. It's like, oh, I was born with 2 arms, but I don't ever use my left arm because I'm right-handed. So I don't need my left arm. And so then my baby is just going to be born with just a right arm because I don't need my left arm. That again, they're trying to explain how come animals change over time. He didn't know genetics, so he just didn't understand how it works. Again, not the way evolution works. The way evolution works, which has been proven since Darwin and Wallace wrote their 2 books, it's been proven over and over again the last 150 years. We haven't seen him be wrong, right? What he wrote, the ideas he wrote are correct, and we can prove it over and over again through scientific evidence. So Darwin and Wallace both came up with almost the exact same theory as you saw in the video. Darwin being the older and richer guy, and he could prove that he came up with it before Wallace. Wallace allowed him to get the bigger credit. So Darwin published his book on the origin of species by means of natural selection in 1859. And then Wallace published his book called Darwinism, giving credit to Darwin, although Wallace had other evidence than Darwin. So we have 2 books full of evidence on how this works. The big idea in Darwin's Origin of the Species is something called descent with modification, that every species had to have come from a pre-existing species, right? Life comes from life. And that somehow, this is before he didn't even know genetics. So somehow the species are able to change over time. And of course, now we know the somehow. The somehow is mutation. But he did not know that. So that's not in his book. Darwin, again, not the first, but, he was just the most influential. And big ideas here. Some of his examples a lot of his examples are from the Galapagos Islands. The tortoises from the Galapagos Islands, each island has a different tortoise. And you can see some of those tortoises at the San Diego Zoo. We've had those tortoises since the early 1930s, and they are still there today, and they're expected to live 150, 200 years. Finches is also another example of all these different types of finches that live on the Galapagos Islands. And he could just tell that they probably all came from one finch, right? One finch somehow got on these islands and then basically changed into different species on each island. So again, 13 finches from one finch. That's the concept here. Descent with modification. So if we just looked at this picture, let's start over here. I know it's kind of a little, but let's start with a circle. So this is going to help you picture what we're talking about. So we start with a circle. So the next one is like one of their offsprings has a mutation, right? And now they're kind of like squished. They're a different shape, okay? And then another offspring might be born and was born shaded. Okay. So then this squished one by mutation gets a line, or this one gets a head. And this one kind of stays the same, or this one gets some hairs, mutation, right? And so now this one is going to get an eye. This one gets a second line. This one, the head gets dark. This one, the body looks different. All right, this one has some weird shading going on. This one lost the hair. This one got darker here. And then you get this, right? So we started out with one circle, and now look at all the different species we have from that one circle over time. Now, when we say time, we're talking millions of years usually. There are examples of maybe thousands of years or a few hundred years, but we're really talking millions of years. So on Earth, we're here, right? We got all these different species. And then it is hard to imagine what was that species like way back in the beginning before we got to this. That is evolution. That is what we see on planet Earth. All right, so this huge book, The Origin of the Species, in biology class, we pare it down to 4 big ideas. And natural selection, right? So natural selection, that the environment favors and chooses what is going to survive and what is not. So in order for natural selection to really work well, the first thing that has to that happens is what we see is that a lot of animals or plants, but plants are animals, a lot of organisms is the right word, produce way more offspring than could ever survive. And because of that, it's almost allows like the environment to have a lot of choice. And it's like, this one that was born, that one's good. That one was born, not so good. That one's going to die. This one's going to live and reproduce. So the fact that a lot of offspring are born really allows for natural selection to happen probably at a faster rate than like humans, right? Humans, we have 1-2 kids. We don't have 100 babies every year and hope that one of them survives, okay? So this is true for other organisms. Genetic variation, which we already learned, right? We know we all look different, even though we're the same species, even as humans, that we have genetic variation, that differences do exist genetically from siblings, right? So you're born and you look different from your brother and sister. Genetic variation. 3, there is a struggle out there. So this whole more are produced than can survive. Why is that? Because dang it, it's hard to survive in this world. Okay? There's competition for resources. You're fighting over food. You're fighting over a place to live. You're fighting for a mate, right? There are things out there that want to eat you. So not every organism that is born is going to live to adulthood and have babies. That's the struggle to survive. And that leads us to number 4, differential reproduction. The organisms that were born with the best variations, right? And now we're going to start calling these adaptations, are more likely to survive, live to be an adult, and then have babies of their own. And so if they live to be an adult because they have this characteristic or adaptation that helped them live to be an adult, they are passing that down to their offspring, right? And the ones that were born with really bad adaptations won't make it to adulthood, will not survive, will not reproduce, will not have babies. And so those genes disappear because they never got to pass it on to the next generation. So it takes all of these 4 things working together for evolution to occur. So just to show you pictures of overproduction of offspring. I mean, look, I was talking about plants, right? The dandelion. See, each one of those is a seed to make a new, seeds are offspring of plants. They're babies, right? So the seed to make a new plant. How many of those are on there? 100, right? Hundreds? Have you ever counted? It's just fun. Rabbits. I don't know. I mean, you probably have heard the term breeding like rabbits because rabbits can have over 100 baby rabbits in 1 year. Like one rabbit can have 100 babies in 1 year. This is a picture of tadpoles, right? So this is, or frog eggs. So one frog laid all those little black dots will turn into a tadpole, and then it's supposed to grow up to be an adult frog. But of course, not all of them will. Not all of these seeds will land in the right place and grow into a new dandelion. A lot of those seeds will never become a dandelion. That's so sad, isn't it? All right, next one, genetic variation. So it's just obvious. Like here's ladybugs. And I'm sure maybe you've seen, some ladybugs are orange and some ladybugs are red and some have lots of spots and some have a few spots. Some have no spots. They're all ladybugs. They're all the same species, but they're all different, right? Frogs, this is all the same species of frog, and this is all the different looks that frog can have. And then, of course, really good example of all of our dog breeds, right? These are all dogs. They're the same species, but boy, do they all look really different. Genetic variation is natural. Struggle to survive, again, always fighting for food, right? This just makes me think of Lion King or something. But everybody is fighting to live, right? To eat and to not be eaten. So that exists out there. And then finally, differential reproduction. This is a picture you're going to see a lot about something called a peppered moth. So the peppered moth gets its name because this is the moth that you normally see. And here's this black moth, and you might think that's a different species of moth, but it's not. It's the same species. So, whenever moths get together, they don't really care if you're black or peppered. They just have offspring. But what happened was before in England, the bark of the tree, it was the white with black spots. And so this was the most common moth. It's why we called it peppered moth, because that's the one they saw. But after the Industrial Revolution, all that smoke that went into the atmosphere, it covered up the trees and made all the trees' bark look black. And because of that, the black moth like up here, you can see, blends in much better than the peppered moth. So the peppered moth though this one used to blend in the best. And so you can see the population over years. The pepper moth, there used to be more of this one than the black, right? They were all both born, all the time, but there'd be more of these. And then now, when you go look at the peppered moth population, you find more black moths than the peppered color. And so that is differential reproduction. All right, other words I kind of started out talking about. Adaptation, that's a word that you're born with a variation that's an advantage. If it's an advantage, we call it an adaptation. So you were born with an adaptation. Again, adaptations are caused by mutation. You were born because a mutation occurred, and hey, it turns out that mutation's good. So that's an adaptation. Fitness is a word that is used in the book, Origin of the Species. It's a measure of the individual's hereditary contribution to the next generation. So basically, having an adaptation increases your fitness, which increases your ability to survive and reproduce. And then we have natural selection, the environment, not anything else, not you, right? Like not yourself. You can't like favor yourself like, yes, I'm going to live. The environment is going to choose who lives and who dies. So like down here, do you see this? I don't know if you can tell. This is a praying mantis in here. Here he is. Or she, probably she, because females are the ones that live. So here is the she. And look how blended in to the flowers they are. Now, what if you were born on this orchid and you were all solid green? Well, maybe you'd look like the stem. Maybe what if you were born brown? Then you would stand out, and then something that would like to eat you would eat you because they could see you. And then the ones that were born pink, like the flowers, the predator can't see you, so then the predator doesn't eat you, and so then you live, and then you have babies that also have pink. And that is natural selection. And you've probably heard the term survival of the fittest. It's actually not from Origin of the Species, but it was down here. You could see the British philosopher coined the phrase. And so a lot of people talk about being the survival of the fittest is natural selection because you are fit to survive. And then this is really, 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 really important. Populations evolved, not individuals. And this, again, is why people think evolution is just not true. It's just not true. Because one animal is not going to turn into another. And that's true. I agree. One animal isn't. But a whole population can. And that's the story. Where you can have rabbits that used to have white with them, but after time, you don't see them anymore. And you never see them. And then they're all brown. This, again, is microevolution, but it does lead to macroevolution. Okay? So populations evolve, not individuals. And that, I know, was long, but really, really important that you understand this concept. It's a really big one in biology, and I really want you to get it.